kick it off. Thanks everyone, and apologize for the delay. My name is Walt, and I'm with Room Real Estate. Room is we're the largest by volume realtor in Santa Cruz County. We do about between 100 and 120 listings over the years, per year. And so what I want to do is to kind of kick it off a little bit. I've been selling real estate for the last 6 years, and I'm working specifically with folks, baby boomers like ourselves, that are dealing with moving into the next phase in life. And you know, some of the questions that come up and issues recur on a regular basis. So I thought it'd be good to put together more of a panel of subject matter experts like ourselves to drill down on specific questions and address the issues that you might have. And so what the goal of today is, the format is just to put information out there, bullet points, best practices that might generate some questions that you might have about your situation. I'd like to keep it, I think we're small enough that we can ask the questions as they come up, and you know, and then if there's any one-on-one specifics, everyone's got cards here, and feel free to grab the card and have one-on-one conversations at another time as well. Great, so the panelists include Christian Gonzalez, who's a CPA locally, and he'll talk about how to avoid taxes legally. And Ligo Cia, she's running a little late, and she's the financial planner, and she'll discuss estate planning and trust and wills, and you know, what kind of legal paperwork that you need to have in place. And then Dwayne Dawson is a mortgage consultant, and he'll talk about how to get a mortgage without having a W-2. There's a lot of different tools that you can use along those lines. And then Ronnie is a estate liquidation person, and he'll talk about how to declutter and you know, how to move and how to sell those personal belongings that maybe you don't have any need for or room for any longer. And so that's what he does. He's got a business along those lines, him and his wife. And then we also had Jennifer Andreyko, and she's the marketing director of Aegis Living. And she called me at the last minute, and unfortunately there was an emergency and was not able to make it. But if there's anyone that needs information about assisted living, I can get that, and I can get you her card. And you know, she's very knowledgeable about all the different aspects of assisted living, whether it be you know dementia memory units or you know different types of support mechanisms and pricing involved with it. She's very helpful from that standpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick it off and just talk a little bit about the market in general, and then we'll turn it over to Christian and then Dwayne and Ron. So in terms of the national economy, you know, the 2003 turned out much better than it was anticipated. We avoided a recession, inflation came down, and with the help of improved supply lines, increased labor force, and the Fed rates came down. So that was all good. So in the housing market, the active inventory remains really tight still, and it has a lot to do with you know, the homeowners not wanting to give up that 3% mortgage that they have. And people really are moving for three Ds, the three dreaded Ds that they call them. It's divorce, death, and downsizing. And we're here to talk about the downsizing aspect of it. So last quarter of 2023, the rates hovered around 8%, which was crazy. It's coming down now. October of last year was the weakest month of sales activity since 2010, which was when the big housing bust took place. So the good news is that with the interest rates coming down and existing inventories improving, single-family construction improving, you know, home prices should rise. You know, the whole thing about the local market, we live in a really unique situation here. We've got the high-tech people on the other side of the hill and the ocean and the redwoods. So people the demand is that people want to live where they like to play. That's why everyone's coming over here. So, you know, our area still continues to suffer from the high interest rates. But, you know, we look at the tech sector, and it seems like they're pinning their hopes on this new AI technology and platforms and drive innovation, which will, over time, eliminate those 30,000 jobs that we lost through the COVID periods. So the local area is poised to recover inflation as inflation slows from more of this work at home becomes a new normal. Now I want to just kind of give you some bullet points out there that might generate some food for thought. So the market is not crashing, and prices and home selling are still moving up. It's doing well. Home ownership is desired, and rates are still not high from a historical perspective. And maybe Dwayne, who is involved with mortgage and rates, can maybe talk about that in a minute or two. Renters are not better off than homeowners. 98% of all mortgages are current, and home equity in homes are at an all-time high. Home ownership is about the long term and not about timing the market. To give you an idea, over the last 5 years, homes appreciated about 29%, and homes in your investments in 10 years was over 50%. So that's a pretty significant increase and a great investment to me. Homeowners need to be to have a specific reason to get rid of that 3% mortgage. 25% of those will move if the rate goes down to 4 to 6%. And people stay in their homes at an average of around 12 years. 1 in 5 are struggling with homeowner insurance. And I don't know if you have friends that live out in the hills around here, between the fire and flood, it's crazy expensive. It's about 3 times what it was a couple years ago. Cash buyers are involved in about 30% of the transactions, and they're not affected by the rate. So cash is king kind of thing. November 22 was likely to hit the rock bottom from the lowest interest rates for home sale at this sale of the highest prices. And finally, the best time to buy a home was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So that's kind of what I just wanted to put out there. And if you have any questions, we can take it whenever you want, or at this point maybe I can pass it over to Christian, who can talk a little bit from more of the tax implication standpoint.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you all for being here. So, my name is Christian. I'm co-owner at CA Waxer, CPA firm here in Santa Cruz. So I'll be focused primarily on the income tax side of things when you're selling a home, selling primary residence specifically, and then I'll get into some of the Prop 19 issues with selling a home. I can get very technical and nuanced. I'll try to stick just to the topic of downsizing and how that comes into play with those 2 topics. So, again, we're a pretty small group here, so if at any point you have a question on something that I'm saying, on the clarification, just feel free to chime in. I'll try and get to it as soon as I finish my point. So, with that, the main thing from an income tax perspective, when you're downsizing, selling a home, right, is how much tax am I going to pay when I sell this thing? Especially, considering this, the term downsizing kind of, alludes to the fact that you've lived in this home for quite a while. It's a bigger home. My thought process is you probably acquired the home, in the 70s, 80s, a long time ago, to where there's been a lot of appreciation on that property. So, as you're going through it and you're thinking, all right, how much tax am I going to pay? That's going to impact, right, the next house you're going to purchase because that the proceeds you receive are going to be eroded by that tax you're going to pay. So, from our perspective, the first things you start to analyze from that is, the sales price will be the fair market value. That's somewhat easy to substantiate. But then in order to figure out, right, how much tax I'm going to pay, you're going to have to figure out what your cost basis is, right? So, in terms of how you go about cost basis, there's some key questions to consider or ask yourself. It's, first was how do we acquire this property? Did we buy the land? Did we buy a property with a home already built on it? So that's usually your starting point, is the initial purchase price of that property. From there you would factor in any major remodels, additions you've done throughout the time you've owned it. So that kind of gives you a starting point in terms of how much gains they're going to be on the sale of that property. So from there, yeah, go ahead.
You said you're okay with questions, or you want?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
So in my case, I've owned my house for 30 plus years, and I also have a rental property that I've owned for that long. And I don't think I understood how to keep track of improvements and repairs correctly. And so at this point, and also because I threw out files because I thought I don't need them further back than 7 years. So if you could address that, what to do if you don't know how to prove your repairs and such.
Yeah, so good question. So, right, I mean, big thing is if you ever get audited, right? That's the IRS ever audits you, right? They're going to want records. They're going to want invoices. They're going to want proof of payment. You know, that's going to be the gold standard in terms of substantiating what you've done there. You know, pictures, documentation, all that stuff helps. If
But after
all that stuff's gone, right? There's no
and even
records.
after 30 years, and back then there weren't even computers to put stuff on. You know what I mean? It was paper.
Yeah. No, there's definitely some difficulty there for sure, right? I mean, if you've owned it for 30 plus years, you know, there's definitely some analysis that can be done to basically say here's kind of construction costs around certain periods. So there's ways around it, right? I mean, bulletproof is having all those invoices, all the checks you've made out, right? But there's ways you can substantiate some of it, you know, whether the IRS accepts it or not, that's another question. That's probably something where the lawyers get involved. That's where they come into play and help you fight that case. But that's a good question. I mean, it comes up often, right? At least a handful of times a season, we get a client that comes in. You know, usually a child's coming with an older parent. You know, they're selling their home, and then it's like, well, we don't have any records. And it's like, okay, well, let's start with what you bought it for. Usually that's easy enough to figure out for the most part. And from there, it's more just, it's figuring out, all right, what types of improvements did you do? Did you put a new roof on? Did you do a new deck? Any major additions, major remodels? And we start to like reconstruct cost basis from that perspective. And then from there we start, okay, we get a bigger picture, step away, and it's like, okay, like, are we comfortable moving forward with this? How much documentation, how much support can we gather to prove our case if there were ever a question?
So you do that with the CPA, or you do that with a realtor?
You do it usually with whoever's preparing your tax returns, yeah. But it's good for the realtor to know that stuff, right? Because that's usually CPAs. We come alongside early in the process, late in the process, you know, a whole year after the transaction's taking place. So for sure, the realtor. I mean, you can, you know, getting in front of it with them, and more often than not, a realtor will be like, hey, you need to talk to a tax preparer. Doesn't have to be a CPA, it could be any preparer that has a good understanding of, you know, most of us do. So, you know, could be a CPA, could be the realtor. I mean, it's really just high level trying to figure out from a ballpark perspective, right? Like, how much tax am I going to pay? Because if I sell a home for $1 million, I might pay $300,000 in taxes. All right, I can only buy a house for $700,000 unless you get a loan, right? So it's important. You know, that's a good question. You know, the reconstructing cost base can be important. And so that's the
And
first
reconstructions can be audited and be successful in an audit?
for sure, yeah.
So it's just called a reconstruction of base?
That's the way I'm terming it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, right, that's the first method. I mean, the other questions to ask, right, it's like, all right, how did I acquire this property, right? Maybe you didn't buy it, maybe you did buy it and you purchased it with a spouse passed away. You know, how you held title matters to that property because there's what's known as stepped up basis for that primary residence, right? If it's community property, your new cost basis is, you know, whatever the fair market value was when that spouse passed away. Say it was held as joint tenants, then okay, now only half of that basis is stepped up. So it'll definitely have a huge implication in terms of how much gains that are going to be there. Because if your spouse passed away, you know, a month ago, and you're like, I don't want to live in this house anymore, it was community property, you sell it the next day, there's not going to be any gain or loss on it, right? Because again, you get stepped up basis, it's community property, there's no gains because, you know, the cost base is basically equal to your fair market value at that point. So
But it's not just with spouse, it could be my son gets a stepped-up basis.
right, so in that case it'd be half. Again, that's like joint tenants type situation.
It's only half of the stepped-up basis?
Right.
Oh, it's not the full stepped-up basis?
If you own it 50-50, no.
No. if he inherits after I die.
Both, I'm talking about the situation where there's one surviving spouse.
Okay.
Yeah. So cost basis, right? So knowing how you acquire the property is going to be important because that's going to dictate how much gains you have there. The IRS does give an exclusion amount per individual, so as long as you meet two requirements, the ownership and use tests, you own and live in it for 2 out of the last 5 years, the IRS gives you a $250,000 exclusion from the gains. So each individual receives that exclusion, and it's basically tested independently. So as a married couple, you have to meet those tests for the most part independently. There's some caveats around the ownership piece where as long as one spouse owns it but both have used it, you each still qualify for the exclusion. But each individual qualifies for this exclusion. Again, it's $250 per individual, so that's why as a married couple, you hear in the news, right? You get $500,000 exclusion, but it's more of the fact that there's a married couple, 2 individuals, $250 each, $500K, right? So that's out there. Again, ownership and use tests have to be met for that. That's basically owned and used it for 2 out of the last 5 years. And then just beyond that, right, there's some other things that we'll factor in that pretty detailed, technical, right? Was the house ever rented out before you moved in or selling it? Was it rented out after you moved out of it and are now selling it? Did you ever use the home for business, claiming home office, expenses, depreciation? Right? A lot of that stuff will come up for sure. Again, good questions to ask. And usually, once it gets into those sorts of questions and the answers are yes to those, probably better off reaching out to a CPA tax preparer to help navigate those situations. I'll just kind of finalize the income tax side of things real quick. I mean, the one common misconception is that we hear often is, I sold my primary residence, but I acquired a new primary residence, I get to defer all the gains, right? The answer is no, you can't. It's an old rule that's been out of play for a while now, so you sell your primary residence, there's no real mechanism to defer gains on that. There's some tax strategies that we can facilitate, but for the most part, you sell a primary residence, pick up the gains, you pay the tax. You buy a new one, there's no way to defer the tax by rolling into that new primary residence. So that's kind of where I'll leave things with the income tax side of things. So transition over to property tax. So I'll only focus on, again, downsizing, you're moving from one residence to the next. Right, Prop 19 is fairly new within the last 2-3 years, right? So it expanded how folks 55 and over can transfer the property tax base. So as long as you're going equal or lesser value in terms of your sales price of the home you're moving out of to the purchase price of the home you're moving into, again, equal or lesser value, you can transfer your property tax base over with no increases. Yeah, go for it.
A quick question, but in regards to if you purchase a home that's of greater value, you could still carry that tax basis, right?
Correct.
Equivalent to whatever that purchase price or your value was, right? So if you sold your home for $1 million, then $1 million of that new house, it applied. The Prop 19 does apply, correct?
Right. So good question. So prior to Prop 19, you couldn't trade up.
It was like Prop 13 before that, right?
Yeah, so now Prop 58, Prop 13, kind of all interrelated. So now, right, you can also go equal or greater value. So again, you transfer your property tax base, and then the spread between the fair market value of each gets tacked onto that property tax base. So before it was, if you went over, if you went greater than the sales price of your home, you couldn't transfer it. But now there's that mechanism to where you can add that. You can take the majority of it's going to be transferred, and you tack on the spread on the fair market value.
Right.
Yeah.
And previously it was only within the same county, right? Now we're at Prop 19, it's anywhere within the state.
Prior to it, there were a handful of counties that participated, but correct. Now it's every county, basically all throughout California, you can transfer the base.
Tremendous, yeah.
And it's up to 3 times in your lifetime, basically.
Wow.
So that's the majority. Again, it's 55 or over where you can transfer that property tax base. There's other things that come involved with property taxes, but again, that's more related to gifting or death, or it involves basically your children taking over the property and using it as their primary residence. So, go.
Well, I'm interested in the part that has to do with your kid inherits it.
Sure.
And Prop 19 with that, because I think something changed. That's one question. The other is, there's a whole movement, so I'm not an expert on Prop 19, but it changes some goodie that my son won't get anymore. But the other thing is, there's a whole movement to get rid of Prop 19, and if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I won't touch on that last piece, but for sure, right, it changed the way you can transfer property tax base to your children.
But could you say
Yeah,
what?
I
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, right, so the current situation is where you basically not only transfer the primary, as long as the child moves into it and it becomes their primary residence, they basically receive your property tax base, but it's limited to basically $1 million, right? So here's a kind of quick example of how that works, right? So let's say you transfer, it's your primary residence, you gift it to your child, the child inherits it, the child moves in, right? Let's say the fair market value at that point was $2.5 million. Let's say your property tax base was $400,000. So the way the math shakes out is you take your property tax base, or 400, you add $1 million, which is what the exclusion amount is, right? So now our base value, or fair market value, is 1.4 million. So if I'm saying the fair market value was 2.5 when you transferred it, the difference, 1.1, becomes the new property tax base, as opposed to 2.5, right? So they let you transfer some of it over, but they limit it to just $1 million, which is kind of how it was before. But before the child, it didn't have to be the primary residence. It could be commercial property. So they severely limited it in that respect in terms of transferring over to children.
So if it gets undone, then there's not, it goes, I presume,
Well, it
back
depends
to where it
on
was.
what happens. Yeah.
Nobody
Depends on
knows
how-
yet, but
It
whatever it
depends.
was before didn't have this limit where I think, tell me.
It didn't have to be
It
the
has to
primary
live there.
residence.
You're
Correct. It didn't have to be the child's primary residence.
But it was up to $1 million, correct? It was still just $1 million.
It was $1 million in terms of base value.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that limits
So not fair
it.
market value.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have a question?
Yeah, so let me see if I understood. So out of that 2.5, the person that is inheriting the property can pay 1.4. He can tack on the previous specs from the parents, and then the other 1.1 will be the new. So they're paying two different brackets.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll transfer your base piece and then anything basically over.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'll leave it with that.
Okay, great,
If
Christian.
you have questions afterwards, happy to answer.
I want to take a minute. One thing I forgot to do is to kind of go over that you have a packet in here, and there's some information in here that I think would be of interest to you as well. So if you look on the left-hand side, you've got the housing market highlights. And what I did is I put together this information based on a couple of different areas. One was Santa Clara County and the Santa Cruz County. And you see the median sales price. And typically, the market over there is about a third more than the market here in the Santa Cruz area. So you're, again, seeing a lot of people coming over here, more value for their property. And also from the Scotts Valley and Santa Cruz, that kind of gave you an idea as to what the median price is per home. And to kind of give you an idea of the closed sales, days on market seems to be going up. The market is a little slower from that standpoint. And the closed sales as well. There's also in there a housing update, and this comes out on a quarterly basis. And I'd be happy to send these to you if you're interested in seeing this on a regular basis. And the last document on that side is the Santa Cruz County. And what's also interesting is that the average price per square foot. So that kind of gives you an idea as to what your potential, again, one data point. You got to get an idea as to what your home is worth. And I can go into more exhaustive competitive market analysis, but for your own information, that kind of gives you an idea as to, roughly around what the market, what the home value would be for your property. On the other side, real quickly, is downsizing made simple. So this kind of gives you an idea, best practices, and this is something that I plagiarized from my friend Lonnie down there, and he is the expert. So anything to do with the downsizing, decluttering, moving, selling those precious items that you have, he's got the best practices along those lines. And also the last thing is I wanted to kind of give you an idea as to best practices on selling guide. And these are interested various different bullets in the step-by-step approach for selling and for buying a home. And I can go into that in a lot more detail too, but this is more or less just from a high-level overview of that information. And with that, I see Leah has joined us, so that's great, thank you. And so Leah is a financial planner and works with different estate types of planning as well, and in the legal documents, and she can talk a little bit about the trusts and wills and all the different tools that are available from your standpoint as you go through this downsizing exercise.
Perfect, I appreciate that. So, like Walt just said, my name is Leah Garcia, and I specialize in helping families to protect, distribute, and transfer their wealth. So let me ask you folks, when we talk about like living trust, how many of you are familiar with living trust? Do you own a trust right now? So the majority of you feel like you own a trust, you feel like you've got everything in place for that? Okay, well then this will just be like a really quick refresher. So a lot of times people ask me, what's the difference between a will and a trust? Well, I just have this little acronym, WILLTRUST, will versus trust. So a will is basically your wishes. It's the things that you would like to have happen. However, it does not avoid probate and the public probate process. We're all familiar with probate, right? Heard of those stories before? So if you just write down your wishes, then it still has to be validated by the court. And that's what we just don't want to have happen, right? Because then all your friends and nosy neighbors know about all of your assets and all of your debts. So a will does not avoid probate. The I stands for incapacity. If you only have a will, there's no provisions for if you are unable to speak for yourself. For example, if you're in an accident or some kind of medical condition. My 19-year-old nephew was in a motorcycle versus truck accident, and he was in a coma for 4 months. He could not speak for himself. So a will does not make provisions for who is going to make medical decisions for you, who can keep the lights on and write checks for you and get access to keep your business and things like that going. The first L stands for loss of control. You don't get to make any decisions, you can't make any provisions for how and when your assets are distributed. Will they receive them over time or lump sums? There's no regulations or guidelines. So basically what will happen is all of your assets are going to be accounted for, liquidated because the taxes are due within 9 months or less. And then from there, they're distributed equally to your immediate beneficiaries, which is basically your children. Whether you like them all equally or not, they get distributed equally. If you don't have any direct descendants, then it will go to whoever they can find that are related to you. I actually had a client who inherited almost $1 million from an uncle that he had never even met. So things like that do happen. And the last will is really legal, right? You're leaving your family exposed to all of the legalities, the pain, the heartache, and the anguish. And this is really when families can be really destroyed. Their structure can be destroyed. Because a living trust is not just about your assets, but it's also about your legacy, your intellectual property, your rationale behind how you left your assets, why you left them, how you accumulated them, and your own personal story. So that's a will. None of us want that, right? What is a trust? Well, there are many different types of trusts, but this is a real basic just overview. The T stands for trust, meaning that you do not own your assets. They're now owned in the name of the trust. So I'm going to assume all of you have a trust that is not in your name. And what I mean by that is, if your name is Mr. and Mrs. Jones, your trust is not in Mr. and Mrs. Jones' names. You can elect to put your trust in any name that you elect to. Does that make sense? So, and why this is important is that part of a trust is anonymity. It's it's not just about probate, it's about many things. It can be about taxation, about capital gains, mitigation, elimination, also about making yourself, your assets invisible to creditors and creditors. Go ahead.
Well, I did my trust like 25 years ago, and I've updated it as my son grew up. But the name of my trust is my name, the year I did it, like 1997,
Yeah.
UDT, blah, blah, blah. So it does have my name in it. Does that make it not private? Or
And what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah, you know, most people I meet, when they made it their trust, they do put it in their name. So again, I am not an attorney, I'm not a tax professional, so this is not tax or legal advice. However, what I have seen from my attorneys is they do suggest that you consider putting your trust in a different name. And that doesn't mean a person's name. It could be named after just anything that is meaningful to you. I have a client who creates roses, so he has a special rose that he created his trust in the name. It could be somebody that you want to pay homage to, maybe a family member, maybe there's a certain word or integrity that means something to you, a family tradition. Because if it's simply in your name, Miss Sarah, then, you know, if something happens, fender bender, anything like that, we're in a litigious society. It is very, very simple. Attorney will really look at who you are and just see if there is any asset that they can see, which is really, really simple if everything is in your name. Does that
How
make
big of
sense?
a deal is it to change it? Just everything about it's the same, except I change it to the, you know, Tango Trust or whatever.
Right, that's up to your attorney. All of them handle that differently.
Okay.
So usually a basic plan is going to be in your name. A custom plan is usually what attorneys require in order to name it in something other than your own name. Does that make sense? So I don't know if you have a basic plan. I don't know if you've had more of a custom plan.
It seemed custom at the time, but like, that was a long time ago, and it,
Yeah.
you know, I had a young
And
child.
truthfully, people that I meet, baby boomers, we all did our trust when our kids were little. And even if we've updated it, what happens is the language becomes extinct very, very quickly. So it's not just about the rules and regulations, it's also the language. So if you simply have updated by making sure, okay, do we have this asset or not, and not have updated the language, your trust may not be truly updated. So it's something really to unpack and really investigate. So that's the T is for trust. Own nothing, control everything. You decide when or if your heirs receive this asset. And this is what I mean. Perhaps you have some rules of things that you want them to do in order to receive your inheritance. At the same time, you can have some rules of things that they cannot do in order to receive your inheritance. When I started doing this, I've been in this industry 18 years. And at the time, majority of families did own a trust. And now, I would say it's 1 out of 10 families that I come into contact with that have any form of a trust at all. And they're not even aware of the exposure that they have. So that's the T. The R is for revocable and irrevocable. Okay, most people set up a revocable trust, and that's probably what, probably would be suited for most people. Meaning you set up today, you can tear it up tomorrow. So that you can make provisions, you can make adjustments. Maybe something happens and now you don't want to leave this asset to the beneficiary, or you just have some additional rules that you want to implement. At the same time, an irrevocable trust is usually meant or used for things like charities. Maybe you have some charitable things that you want to donate to that you don't want to have changed. You don't want somebody to come in, a family member, and say, you know what, I know Betty wanted to donate to the ABC charity, but we don't really feel like that is something that we want her money to go to. We want it to go to us or to something else. So that's one reason to have an irrevocable trust. Also, when it comes to the wealth transfer and Medicaid, long-term care and things like that, you may want to start getting assets out of your name. So when we're younger, we're talking about accumulating wealth. When we get closer to the sunset, we're going to start trying to get assets out of our name and start transferring that asset while we can, while we're still alive. Are you folks with me? Any questions about that? I know that was kind of a lot to unpack there. But basically, revocable means you can change it easily. Irrevocable means it's very difficult to unwind that. And I've seen many people get themselves into an irrevocable trust, not understanding that they can easily make changes to it. Okay, so that's the R. U is for you make the decisions on how and when these assets are distributed. And I kind of touched on that a little bit, but one of the things that I have a lot of my clients will do is things like, in other words, think about it this way. You don't have to have all of your assets distributed equally upon your passing. I say protect the tree. So this is what I mean. Think about it this way. When we're younger, it's like we have this little seed, right? We get this seed and we find a perfect place in our backyard and we plant the seed and it grows into this beautiful rosy tree, apple tree. And anytime we want an apple, we just go in our backyard and we pluck an apple off the tree. And then we leave it to our children, and guess what they do toward this tree? What do you think they would do when we leave this asset?
Sell the tree.
You know what? I wish they would. You know what they do, Sarah? They go in the backyard, they sharpen the axe, they chop down the tree, they use the wood in their fireplace, they pick the apple, eat the apple, and throw away the seed. It's like, what the heck? So this is what I'm saying is you don't have to distribute your assets when you pass away. You can have a trust that goes on for 50, 100, or even multiple hundreds of years. Keep the assets together. Sam Walton was the richest man in the world until he did what? Until he passed away and he divided his tree to many of his heirs. Why the Rockefellers have been wealthy for 9 generations is because they keep the assets, they keep the wealth together. So you can decide if that's important to you. And then we come to the S, succession planning. This is huge. This is about someone speaking for you if you cannot speak for yourself. If you own a business, maybe there's somebody that you need to put in place who can make those financial decisions. And it's not just about like do not resuscitate, it's about would you want to have this kind of surgery? Would you want to take this kind of medication? So who are you going to put in place to make those medical and financial decisions for you? And the last letter is the T. Your family is going to be, they're going to be so thankful that you put this together. I have seen trust, I've seen families destroyed by not having a living trust in place. I have seen a double probate. Do you have any idea what a double probate is? It is, I wish it was. That's contesting. Somebody comes up and they say, you know what, I met Miss Sarah in 2nd grade and she promised me that asset when we got older. No, a double probate is when somebody who is your beneficiary and you're going through court in the probate process and now they pass away. I have seen probates that last over a decade. And that just decimates and destroys family and your legacy, by the way. And really, in closing, I will say this. A living trust is about not just about avoiding probate, but it's also about taxation, legacy planning, and communicating your wishes and your rationale behind why you're distributing the wealth the way that you are, and also maybe your family history. You know, it's one thing for us to read about or hear about our family stories from someone else. It is quite different for them to hear exactly from their own words. I mean, imagine if you had a story left to you by your great-grandparents. How valuable would that be? My grandfather died when I was 5 years old. And to this day, I'm 58 years old. I can remember sitting on his knee and him telling me stories, and we used to eat moon pies. And I wish that I knew what he was saying to me. I was only 5 years old at the time. So when you're setting up your trust, don't just think about crossing the T's and dotting the I's, but also communicating your intellectual property, your values, and things of that nature. So that's my point. Thank you so much.
What did the U stand for again?
You are still in control.
Oh,
So even though.
I understood the rest of it, I just didn't know what
Okay,
the U
yeah.
stood for.
Yeah, you make those decisions. Thank you, Sarah.
Great. Dwayne?
Hey, how you doing? So, you guys glazed over yet? No, she's good. So it's, you know, it's a lot of big topics, a lot of information, and so my goal, challenge is to try and just really big picture, because as Christian said, I can definitely get into the weeds and talk about specifics, but it really just depends on your specific situation. So Joe, just a couple of things I'm going to touch on. He mentioned interest rates. Interest rates were low, everyone knows they were below 2%, or excuse me, below 3%, although I did get below 2% on some stuff too, but went above 7, they're in the mid 6s now, but really, it's not really even relevant in the sense that people really focus on interest rates and housing prices, when really all that really matters is affordability. Whether you're a first-time home buyer, and your first job and how much can you afford, or whether you're downsizing or right-sizing and you have less income. It's just really about, can I afford this? Right? And so Prop 19, you already touched on, a lot of stuff can overlap. It's one of those things that helps when you're right-sizing, because if you're equal or lesser, or there is some assistance with property taxes, so that it's enabling some people that are over 55 to make that move now, when they otherwise wouldn't have been able to, because property taxes would have kicked them out. So, talking about downsizing, I think was it still called right-sizing your panel? So it's not always downsizing, right? So you know, sometimes it is. Maybe moving to a single family into a condo, or maybe it's just kind of a lateral move. Maybe you're in the country and you're moving to town just for more conveniences. But sometimes people are moving from smaller houses and want a bigger place because they want to bring in children or other people to live with them that might help care for them when they get older. Right? So it's really there's so many different situations, and so it's really hard to really talk in any kind of a concise way, because everyone's situation here is going to look different. So as far as products, there's a million products. I'm just going to touch on two things. The first being bridge loans. It's a term that people throw out there. It's kind of like this mystery to a lot of people. It's really super simple, well, in concept, to me at least. It's basically, it enables you to buy a house before selling your current house. And the reason you would do that is because there, as Walt mentioned, the market is very tight. There's very few houses for sale, and there's a lot more buyers trying to buy from that, right? So you're trying to put your best foot forward, and if you want to put an offer on a house and someone else has cash, they're probably not going to take your offer if you're making a contingent on first selling your house. They're like, well, I don't even know what you're going to do with that house, right? So a bridge loan enables you to buy a house without first selling your house. So the way basic simplicity does is a loan is written for the purchase of that home, and then it's blanketed, cross-collateralized is the term, over both properties. So for instance, say you're buying a place, your house is worth $1.5 million, you're gonna go buy a place for $1 million, maybe you're gonna have a loan on your house, you go get a loan for $1 million, a bridge loan, it secures it both, you buy that house, and then you sell that house. When you sell the $1.5 million, you pay back the $1 million loan with the proceeds from the sale. So it's just a tool, a very basic tool that enables you to purchase before you sell first. So again, there are many different scenarios that come up. That's just the most simple. The other one, and it seems like it's kind of, I really like to talk about them because there's so many myths around that reverse mortgages. This is not a sales pitch or anything like that. But there are a lot of myths and misunderstandings, and I think I did put a flyer in there about something they call it the truths, because I think a lot of people have misunderstandings. But the basic concept of a reverse mortgage is it's just a mortgage. Bottom line, it's a mortgage. I don't know how well you guys understand mortgages, but there are 15-year fixed mortgages, 30-year fixed mortgages, and there are payments that you make. You make a higher payment on a 15-year fixed mortgage because it takes longer to pay it off. 30-year has a little lower payment. They have interest-only loans where you just pay the interest, so the payment's even lower still. And then in years past, before the mortgage meltdown, they had negative amortizing mortgages where you pay even less the interest. So now So owing 300, you owe 302 the next month, or 303, and it just, but it would enable lower monthly payments for a period of time. Say you were just starting out, and you didn't have a lot of income, so. A reverse mortgage is basically kind of the ultimate of negative amortizing loans, basically. You make no payments, and that payment is basically being added to the balance of the loan. As long as you live in the property, you never have to make a payment, you never lose the house. If you're married and one spouse were to pass away, you still stay and live there. Again, there are lots of information on it, but that's basically it in concept. So you can use reverse mortgages for purchases. Same scenario before. If you're selling a place for $1.5 million, you're going to buy a place for something, say, similar. But you don't want to have that mortgage payment anymore. You can take the proceeds and combine it with a reverse mortgage if you don't have enough proceeds from the sale to buy a place. That's called a reverse for purchase. You can even combine a reverse mortgage with a bridge loan. I did one of those where someone was stepping up, as I mentioned before. They were selling a house, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they're selling a house for $1.5 million, and they want to buy a place for $2 million because they wanted something bigger that their daughter, a married daughter, could move into and they could care for them. So they still used Prop 19 for, $500,000 of it did get stepped up, but their property taxes stayed relatively low, and they were able to purchase the property with a bridge loan, and then when they sold the property that they were selling, they had a balance that there was remaining that needed to be paid, so they used a reverse mortgage to make that. So they had no mortgage payments, their daughter was able to move in, they had the house they wanted, and they could live out the years. So that's really all it itself is probably too much information, but it's again, it's not all about the numbers and the details of the story. It's really about the story and what makes sense for you. Are you trying to pass everything on to your heirs? Do you have any children? What's important to you? That's about it.
Thanks, Wayne. I appreciate that. And like you said, a lot of the devil's in the details. And if you want any further information about any type of mortgage tools that are out there, Dwayne would be more than happy to drill down on your specifics. Great. So our last speaker is Ronnie, and Ronnie is involved with the estate liquidation, and there's a number of different tools and services that he uses, and talk about best practices along those lines. So, further ado, Ronnie.
Hi, thanks for coming out. Again, as he said, my name is Ronnie Castellon. I own Hand-Me-Downs with my wife Samantha, who is unable to attend today, where primary thing we do is downsizing and estate sales, estate liquidation. So generally we get called for one of two reasons. It's either someone is moving from a large home to a smaller home and they just need to get rid of a lot of stuff that's been acquired over the years, or we get a phone call about a family member that has passed away and they need help clearing out the contents of the home to either sell or rent or whatever they're going to do with it. So in the first scenario, in the second scenario with the passing of someone, we generally find out that, people have been in their homes for 30, 40, even 50 years at times, and it's extremely overwhelming for the surviving members of the family to try and clear that out and figure out, what do I do with all this stuff? There's going to be, a garage full of boxes, an attic full of boxes, there's going to be stuff everywhere, especially if you've been in your home for that long. And while you may not realize it, it's extremely stressful on the kids, especially we find out that they just don't want to deal with that kind of stuff. There's always a few things that people want, obviously from their family, they want maybe there's a nice piece of artwork they've always admired in their parents' home they want to keep, but for the most part, they don't want a lot of the stuff there. Now, the other scenario where people are downsizing, it becomes extremely stressful on the person who is moving. You start to look around and see how much you've acquired over all these years, and you just don't know where to start. That's generally what we find out, is people they have no idea how to tackle the amount of stuff that has been acquired. You might not realize it, but even if you're only getting a few things here and there throughout the year, if you're in your house for 40, 50 years, it really, really builds up. You start to not realize it, but you look in the rafters, the attic, basement, whatever you have, it's stuff just starts to pile up. So I'm gonna help you out with a few tips just on basic, where to start, how do you get going. So let's say you are planning on downsizing your home. The very first thing you need to do is just start a conversation with family, even friends, on just kind of realize what type of things they may be interested in. Everyone thinks, I want to give this to my kid when I pass away. This is going to be their inheritance. Maybe they're going to want this, this, and this. The reality is most of the time they don't want those things. My previous job was I managed a pawn shop for over 15 years. And it was almost a daily occurrence that people would just come in with jewelry, artwork, old antique vases and stuff. Just, I inherited this. I have absolutely no emotional connection to it, and they just want to get a few bucks for it. They'd rather pay pennies on the dollar than, have it in their home. And so the important thing to do is just speak with your family, speak with friends, and maybe you have a grandkid that really loves that armchair. Every time they come to your house, they want to sit in that nice, comfortable armchair and relax. Speak to them and say, hey, is this something you would like? You just have to figure out who wants what and what they're going to do with it. Do they actually want it or not? That is, I would say, the most important thing there. And if you have, especially if there's someone else around, they can help you out deciding should you or shouldn't you keep it. That's always the big thing is if you may think you need 4 ice chests from when you used to go camping all the time. But if you haven't used them in a decade, then you probably don't need them. And if you have someone else there to say, you really don't need this, then it just makes it 10 times easier when you have a second thing in there. The next big thing, if you're downsizing or moving out, you really have to determine where you're moving to from where you're currently at. If you are living in, for example, a 4,000 square foot home and moving into a 2,000 square foot home, you have to rationalize that you have to get rid of approximately 50% of your belongings. That's a large number. And this is a pretty common situation when people move into an assisted living facility or, whatever, just moving into a smaller condo perhaps, after moving out of a large family home and all the kids are gone and grown up. So you have to determine what size of a place you need and kind of extrapolate how much of your stuff you need to get rid of. And also, practicality. If you're moving from a home into an assisted living, you probably don't need your lawnmower or your rototiller. Those are the first things that can go. That's nice and easy. And then once you kind of determine, okay, how much stuff do I need to get rid of, the next thing you need to do is figure out what are your necessities. What are you going to need for your next home? There are some obvious things. You're going to need your bed. You're going to need some kitchenware, but then you have to be realistic about it too. You need a 12-piece setting if you're moving into an apartment. You think you're going to be hosting a party of that size again, or can you get away with, a 4-piece setting for when you have a couple guests over? So little things like that are important in just figuring out what is important when what is going with you and what can stay or be dispersed. And again, if there's something that you think is very meaningful to family members and friends, I highly suggest gifting it to them while you're still around to see them enjoy it. I know that's not always easy for people to do. They want to say, hey, I'm going to leave this in their will and their trust, but oftentimes it really is satisfying to see them enjoy the things that they always liked, at your home when they come visit or, whatever the case is. If you have a friend that always loved, up the painting on your wall, like as another example, consider gifting it to them if it's not going to fit in your new home. It's just something to keep in mind. And then, you also have to figure out what it is that is really going to help you out in your new home. You really need to kind of nail it down and just have a list of the key things, and then everything else you can kind of go through and start to create lists of definitely keep, definitely donate, and then there's always going to be some maybes. You can kind of keep that pile off to the side consider it, give it a second look through, and then if it's a maybe, there's a good chance it's going to be a no later on if you look at it a second time. But that's always the most important thing, is figuring out what you need. And then the hardest part, I would say, is figuring out where to start. So always tackle the areas with the least amount of usage. Perhaps an attic or a garage or even a guest bedroom. If there's something in there that you just kind of jam stuff in the closet in the guest bedroom and just kind of keep them for later, that's always a great place to start. And so the biggest thing I can tell you is if you need to start decluttering a little bit, just start small. Even no matter how big of a job you think you have, we've been to some houses where you could barely walk through because there was so much stuff. There's just a tiny little path, shelves covered with stuff, boxes galore, and people just look at it and they see one giant job and they don't know where to start. You have to start small. And whether that be just picking one single junk drawer and going through it, you start. That's it. That's great. Start with that drawer and then go on to the next drawer. Or perhaps just start with the closet. Start going through that. And you always want to go with the places that are least used. If you haven't touched the stuff in your shed in a few years, that's probably a good place to start. And then from there you can kind of, like I said, sort them into, do I need this? Do I definitely not need this? Or am I on the fence now? Once you start doing that, it starts to, really get the ball rolling. You can kind of gain a little momentum on it. And once you do get that momentum, it makes it extremely easier just to continue going. You really get on a roll and, you feel like you've accomplished something by clearing out a few things here and there. Now, what do you do with all of the stuff that you're deciding to get rid of? Well, you have to determine, is this sellable? Do I want to try and make some money on it, or do you don't want to deal with it? You can donate it. I have absolutely no, I can't say anything bad about donating stuff. If you just don't need, a lot of times people do need some money just to help finance the move. Obviously it's expensive to move and, get all that going. So a lot of times people you can hold a little garage sale, or, if you have the capacity, post stuff on Facebook Marketplace, on Craigslist, on Nextdoor. Those are all great outlets that are pretty simple to use, not too hard. And you can always, if you have any kids or grandkids, I'm certain they can help you out with making some kind of post online for selling stuff. But it's also not bad if you just have a lot of stuff you just never want to see again. Donate it. There's plenty of places around town you can call that'll come and pick up. You don't even have to do it. There's hauling services that you can call that will come and just pick up. Or if you do have some things that you would hate to see just given away, a good outlet is, if you have some antiques, you can reach out to antique stores and just kind of talk. My wife and I are part of 2 different antique malls, and there are over 30 dealers apiece at them. And so everybody kind of sells different things, and we frequently get phone calls or people just coming in and say, hey, I have such and such that I'm looking to sell. Perhaps it's a sterling flatware set or some teacups or, whatever the case may be, artwork, vases, glassware. And they just kind of, you can just call and ask around and see who would be interested, and almost guarantee that someone at that store will be interested in what you have. And so that's a good way if you want to make a few bucks off of it. They're going to give you prices that are probably not going to be full value, but it's better than donating it in a lot of cases. So I highly encourage that. Just looking around, and there's a lot of buyers out there. And my wife and I also, one of the services we offer is we also just do buyouts, which we've done several times. If you don't have a full house full of stuff, we can just go evaluate what you have and just make you an offer and haul it all the way, same day, and then you don't even have to think about it again. So there's plenty of people that do stuff like that too, outside of us. So it doesn't have to just be us. And another step when you have the things that you're deciding to keep, that I always tell people to do is look it over a second time. If there are things you absolutely know you need, again, everyone needs a bed to sleep in, but if you're looking over, old sentimental items, sometimes you just don't need to keep those. We did an estate for a family, and this has happened more often than not, but I was finding schoolwork that she had from, when she was 5 years old, 6 years old, that she just kept every little thing, Christmas cards from the 1950s that, great Aunt Dora sent her. And, those types of things are things that I understand that memories are, tied with those, but I assure you that your children have no interest in your Christmas card from great Aunt Dora from the 1950s. But a good tip, if you don't want to just get rid of it right away, if you can have some of your family around to help you do this, you can perhaps share the card with them, tell them a quick story about them, and her memory will live on, through that way, and then you can dispose of the Christmas card in that way. That makes it just a little easier, and it doesn't feel as bad to give up. I definitely understand the fact that memories are tied to things, and as we age, our memories obviously slip. It's hard to get rid of things that have sentimental value to you. So you kind of have to decide on the stuff that you're keeping. Am I keeping it because it's sentimental, or am I keeping it because it's useful? Useful is the most important thing that you should be keeping. However, determining if it's actually useful or if you're just thinking it's useful is also a big problem that we notice. Where people are keeping old chunks of 2x4s in the back shed because they might need it that one day, but if it's been there for 10 years, you probably don't need it. I find that more often than not that there are just plenty of things that you keep thinking, well, I might need it, I might need it, I might need it, and that is a lot of clutter that accrues, or just things that you might need. A great example of this, I know that a lot of the generation that grew up in the Depression, which would be like my wife's grandmother, who was about to turn 102, they like to keep absolutely everything. She'll reuse paper towels and tin foil, and I don't have any problem with that, but she keeps a lot of things that are completely, I don't want to say useless, but not helpful at all, including we found a box at her house one day that said bits of string that were too small to keep, yet she still kept them, which didn't make any sense. So things like that you just have to realize you don't need them, just let it go. That is not useful. And so once you have, again, like I said, once you do have your piles of stuff and you kind of have it determined on what you're going to keep, just go through it a second time. It doesn't have to be extremely thorough, and just look and say, am I really going to use this? That second look makes a huge difference. Every time you see it the first time, you think, oh, there's no way I'm getting rid of this. The deck of cards you got on that flight on your honeymoon, do you really need that? You probably have other memories from the honeymoon that you don't need, but things like that. Especially we get a lot of little trinkets like that. We see matchbooks and things like that from perhaps a memorable dinner or a big anniversary. If it's small, I don't want to tell you to get rid of everything, but things like that you can get rid of them if you just kind of look over them and get a feeling of, okay, I remember this. Yes, that was a great day. Now I don't need this to be taking up room in that junk drawer. And again, as I said, with the stuff that you don't want to keep, that's where you can either donate or determine if it's. A lot of times there's a lot of trash, so you may have to do a dump run or pay someone to haul it away, and then they can determine if it's trash or if it's donatable. A lot of places do that. Now, if the job is extremely overwhelming and you just can't bring yourself to doing it, that's when you would call in a professional like my wife and I, or I know there's some other people around town that do downsizing type stuff, but a lot of companies don't offer the type of downsizing services that we do. We did one for a family a couple months ago, and they weren't moving, they just had acquired way too much stuff. They consumed a lot, they like to buy a lot of stuff, and the house was just completely filled with boxes of, they didn't like to buy one of something, they bought 5 of everything just to make sure they had it. She had probably 50 pairs of boots, all in different colors and styles, and she wore them all, 2-3 times max. And we did a large sale for her. She didn't think that she had that much, but as soon as we started looking through, it was 2 full bedrooms that were just, you could barely walk in them, just filled with boxes. As soon as we started looking, we realized, hey, this is going to be a good job, we can do that. So we do stuff like we can pull higher end items that would sell better online, and we'll put them on like a consignment basis. and post ads or sell them through other online channels prior to the sale, and then we did a live sale for them as well. And I mean, they were hoping to get, you know, they said $5,000 to $6,000, and we doubled that for them. You know, we got almost $12,000, and they had no idea that they just had acquired so much stuff. And you know, I know that they had called another company. They told us, and they said they only do estate sales, whereas you know we will. There's really no job too big or too small for us. We do all kinds of things. Like I said, even if, you know, we've been called over to look at a few things and we just ended up buying a collection, you know, stuff. You know, we went to a large house where the family had a trust. So everything was being distributed amongst the family. Probably 90% of the home was going to family members that were keeping stuff, but they had a bedroom that they just put everything that they said, this is everything that nobody wanted. We just went in there, we made them an offer, and you know, hauled their way within 2 days, and they were completely satisfied. Split up the money between the parties that were involved, and they just said basically, we just don't want to donate it. We know it's good stuff, and we like it to find a new home. So we distributed it ourselves amongst other channels, other dealers, and stuff like that. And for the estate sales, if you do have a lot of stuff or a full household full of things, we do generally works as a 2-day sale, and we will have it open to the public, depending on where it is. We've also had sales in remote areas in the mountains here that were extremely hard to access or had very limited parking, and for that we do have a large network of shoppers that come to our sales. We take information on people that like cameras or people that like books, and we take notes and take down their emails, and we'll hold private estate sales as well. Those generally will last more than just a couple days. Usually for private ones we would do in the span of a month, and we'd invite 5 or so people over at a time to shop, and just do that a couple of times a week until the job is done essentially. But for the main estate sales, that we like to do, it's usually a 2-day process, a Saturday, Sunday. We don't charge anything for no upfront costs. We will come to your house and evaluate and just see everything that's around and come up with a plan of action basically to see how we can serve you. Sometimes it is, we just open the house and have a full public sale. Sometimes it's a private sale. Sometimes we'll just buy stuff. Sometimes it's just consignment items. Maybe it's just like a collection of, antique Asian vases. We'll just take that on consignment. That'd be an easier thing than just opening it up to a public sale. And at the end of it, we do offer clear out service as well. So anything that has not sold, we will either donate or take the appropriate things to the dump. And we also offer things like, which is not very common, but if there is something that the family decides, hey, if this item doesn't sell, we would like to either keep it or they will give it to us on consignment, and we'll sign a contract and everything like that about it. But that's a common thing too, where they say, hey, if let's just say this painting doesn't sell, we'd like it to be sold on consignment if it doesn't sell during the sale. And I just sold 2 paintings in the last couple months that we had for almost a year, but I got 4 or 5 times what I was offered at the in-person sale. I just knew that it was an extremely low offer, so I declined it, and the family was fine with it. We got them a couple $1,000 instead of like $300, and we offer stuff like that. And so every job is a little different, so that's why it's always easiest. We just come over, we check it out, we meet with the people, whoever's involved, whether it be your own goods or if it's family members, of the deceased. And, we do truly enjoy meeting people and hearing the stories, and we like to have a little provenance about, specialty items that are in the house, perhaps, a nice piece that was acquired during vacation back in the 50s or 60s, or, whatever the case may be. We like to hear the stories, and we find that it really helps clients be at ease a little more if they can, people like to talk about their things and kind of show it off a little bit and say, hey, I got this back in India when we were traveling on our honeymoon, or, whatever the case may be. So, we definitely, do our best to just connect with the clients. And, we still maintain relationships where we check in with a lot of our clients, months to even years afterwards, just to see how they're doing and, make sure that everything's okay. But as far as that goes too, we also offer spreadsheets that are shareable so that you can kind of track on what we're selling and just have an idea of what's happening. We do online photo albums that I send out to all of the dealers that we know, our network of shoppers, just so they can see what's at the sales and what's available, and that really helps to maximize how much we can get out of it. We always have two goals. Goal one is get the most amount out of your goods as we can, and goal two is to get rid of the most amount of goods as we can. So there's a fine line between not overcharging, but you have to kind of sell things for a little bit under market value in order to incentivize more sales. And, we've been around it long enough to where we understand that, and a lot of dealers will, are willing to buy a lot of stuff as long as you're giving them a good enough deal on everything. They may end up buying 10 times more items if you give them a decent deal, as opposed to just, the things that they want. They might just say, oh, well, if I'm getting these for this cheap, then I'll add in this, and this, and they might not take. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff that's left over is just going to get donated. So you might as well make a couple dollars in the longer time. But yeah, that's about
That's great.
as far as I got.
Yeah. Thank you, Ronnie. And are there any questions that you might have from any of the panelists?
I was going to ask, on China, is that selling at all?
It's a tough market.
Yeah.
It's not. There's not a.
Nobody.
Yeah, that's the younger generation typically doesn't use stuff like China, like the fine porcelain, sterling flatware sets. That was an extremely common thing that I would get when I was working at the pawn shop. It was always some 20-year-old coming in with grandma and grandpa's silver set. And they're just like, when am I ever going to use this? People don't have the dinner parties like they used to. There is still a market for some China. I'm not saying it's completely worthless, but it's a tougher market, and I do know dealers that deal specifically in China.
Because I finally got up to 18-piece set.
Yeah.
I could host that Thanksgiving dinner, but now, the family's much smaller,
Yeah.
and nobody wants my China.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of people, it takes up a lot of space that, younger generations are typically, what I've noticed is they're a little more concise with stuff. They don't want to have as much clutter. They don't want to have as much just stuff, I guess, in general.
Well, and then I also have the Christmas plates. I have service for 10 Christmas sets, so.
Yeah, so if you're still hosting dinners on Christmas, then it comes in handy. But
smaller.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was going to ask, I have a Christmas village.
Mm-hmm.
It's 15 feet long, and I don't set it up anymore. And how do I get rid of that?
There's definitely a market for that too. Christmas stuff does sell very well.
Because it's the Studio 56.
Yeah.
So, but who do I contact to get rid of that whole?
Even my wife likes to sell stuff like that. We do typically sell a lot of Christmas stuff. There's a couple of, there's like a market in Watsonville, it's called Goat Hill, that they do every year. It's like a big antique fair. They do it twice a year.
Yeah.
And there's one they do in November, and that one typically has a lot of Christmas decor that gets sold. And we did it last year, and we sold almost all of our Christmas stuff. And there's shoppers for that. So, you would probably want to find either a dealer or, again, like I said, you could put a post on, Nextdoor, Facebook Marketplace, which isn't, the hardest thing to do, or, something like that. A couple quick pictures, brief description, and that's all you need to get it going, and people will reach out, and, you'll find somebody for something like that.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions?
I watch the HGTV, and the young people don't like this and they don't like that. But I feel like if I try to change what I'm seeing, in the kitchen and the bathroom, then the next person that does buy it down the line will say, why did they do all this?
Right.
Well, I want to to my taste. So what is the best thing to do?
The best way is, you know, everybody's got their own point of view. And you want to keep it as vanilla as possible, you know, as far as like any type of updates or improvements or repairs, things along those lines, in the home itself. But you want to keep it as, let them be able to go in and create their own vision. Everybody's got a vision. So, you know, a good example, you know, I grew up back east, and we, first house, we had wall-to-wall carpeting underneath was hardwood floors. We had spent $8,000 on refinishing the floors, you know, and if everybody back east does that, right? Came out, we sold the house, and they put wall-to-wall carpeting back over those floors, you know. So it's like you gotta let them figure that out themselves. That's the best path.
Just so it's clean?
Just so it's clean, yeah. And as open as possible. You know, you want to minimize the amount. And what we do, one of the things we do is we'll have a stager come in and give you, she's a professional, and she'll come in and take a look at all the different rooms that you have. Is there a room, is that room a den? Is that room another bedroom? And she can help really organize it. So when someone comes in and sees your 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, 2-bath or something like that, you know, they can create their own image from that standpoint. Or we have what's called a concierge service, where we'll come in, and if work needs to be done, you know, we'll do that for you, and there's no charge associated with it. They're loaning you the money, and then at time of escrow, we'll square up. So we have all sorts of contractors and resources that can go in and make any type of modifications or repairs or upgrades that are necessary in order to get you the best value for your home.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is that something that only your company offers, or is it this concierge service, or other competing companies also offer?
I think we specialize in that concierge service and be able to go out there. There are other companies that do it, but that's something that we, as I mentioned, you know, we really focus on listings. And, you know, with the 100 to 120 listings that we do every year, you know, we'll go in there and make sure through our staging concierge service that house shows as best as possible to give you the highest return that's available in the market. Yeah. And there's I got this little sign in over there if you want to leave your contact information, and I'd be happy to follow up with you if you have a comment, or if you are looking for anything in particular, and you know, I'd be more than happy to follow up with you, or with that newsletter that we put out as well. Great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.